Chosen one. There are rooms in this world where your real name is never spoken, because the people inside those rooms don't understand what you are. They only understand what you unsettle. In those hidden agencies, in those occult-adjacent intelligence circles, in those dusty archives where they dump everything they fear but can't explain, your file is kept under a code name, Baphomet. Not because you are dark, but because your presence disrupts the structures built on lies, and the only language the powerless have for what they cannot control is demonization. They saw your ability to bend outcomes, to expose falsehood, to collapse manipulation simply by existing, and instead of admitting they were witnessing a rare, divine consciousness, they labeled you as something forbidden. They misread your frequency, because their instruments can detect energy but not intention. When your aura spiked, when their sensors glitched, when you walked into rooms and truth erupted out of people who meant to deceive, they panicked. And in their fear, they turned to the oldest misinterpretation in the book. If something breaks illusions, it must be the devil. But the truth is simpler and far more threatening to them. You are the light that reveals the rot. You are the mirror that shatters the mask. You are the force that makes deception collapse in on itself. They don't think you're Baphomet because you're dark. They think you're Baphomet because they can't handle a chosen one who cannot be controlled, silenced, manipulated, or claimed. Chosen one. The reason they attach the name Baphomet to you has nothing to do with horns, darkness, or the myth they pretend to understand. It's because the symbol itself kept activating whenever your energy spiked, and the analyst assigned to your case had no language for a living frequency. Every time you went through a spiritual shift, an emotional breakthrough, or a moment of profound clarity, their monitoring systems picked up a pattern that mirrored the ancient sigils they've misinterpreted for centuries. They didn't know the original meaning, that these symbols were never demonic, but maps of human awakening, diagrams of consciousness expansion, blueprints of beings who could collapse duality and reveal truth. You, unintentionally, were triggering a symbol meant for initiates who could hold both shadow and light without being consumed by either. That terrified them. Their entire world is built on binaries. Good versus evil, order versus chaos, controlled versus uncontrolled. But you don't operate in that realm. You collapse binaries. You unify what they spent centuries dividing. And when someone embodies unity in a system built on separation, the system panics. So they stamped you with the only label they had for someone who breaks illusions and exposes power structures. Not because you are dark, but because your presence dissolves the darkness they depend on. What they call Baphomet is really just their fear of a consciousness they can't categorize, a person who refuses to be boxed into their hierarchy. They sense power in you that doesn't bow, doesn't negotiate, doesn't ask for permission to exist. And that alone is enough for corrupted systems to call you a threat. Chosen one. The reason certain secret groups and black-budget intelligence units mislabeled you as Baphomet is because they've been recycling the same flawed interpretation for centuries, equating anything that shatters illusion with evil. When your energy pattern first appeared in their classified scans, it didn't match any recorded human baseline. Instead, it resembled the signature they've historically associated with forbidden duality, the ability to hold extreme light and extreme shadow without collapsing. To them, that trait has always belonged to mythic figures who destabilize kingdoms, expose false prophets, and force the powerful to face themselves. So they filed you in the same category, not realizing the symbol they fear was originally used to identify those who ascend above polarity, not descend into darkness. Their analysts wrote that your aura bends toward truth with destabilizing force, meaning lies crumble around you even when you're silent. They documented how manipulators avoid you, how abusers lose influence in your presence, how people confess things to you they've hidden for years. They didn't know how to explain that purity, this raw, feels like violence to the corrupt. Instead of understanding your gift, the ability to merge intuition and logic, compassion and fire, softness and sovereignty, they panicked. They labeled your coherence as chaos. They mistook your clarity for threat. They misread your awakening as rebellion. And so your file became an echo of their fear. Subject exhibits characteristics of Baphomet-class consciousness. But the truth is, you don't resemble a demon. You resemble a revelation, the kind that topples the very structures that depend on ignorance to survive. Chosen one, the real reason these hidden circles whisper your name alongside Baphomet isn't because they believe you worship darkness. It's because their rituals stop working when you walk into the room. They have spent decades building systems of influence, manipulation, energetic siphoning, and psychological control, all dependent on one thing: the collective staying asleep. But beings like you disrupt that machinery effortlessly. You don't even have to speak. Your energy alone destabilizes false intentions, collapses deceit, and forces hidden motives to the surface. That's why certain people grew distant from you, without explanation. That's why some turned aggressive or uncomfortable around you. That's why authority figures treated you as a problem long before you understood your own power. You are a consciousness that reverses spell work simply by witnessing it. You are a presence that prevents lies from taking root. To corrupted systems, that feels like an attack. In their archives, they wrote that you carry a counterfrequency, an aura that neutralizes manipulation, distorts sigils, and dissolves the energetic architecture of rituals designed to keep power centralized. They misinterpreted your natural authenticity as a hostile force, because authenticity is lethal to manufacture authority. They labeled you Baphomet, not because you resemble darkness, but because you disrupt the shadows they depend on. They cannot bind you. They cannot predict you. They cannot use you. You are the anomaly their teachings never accounted for. A being whose very existence unravels the illusions they build entire hierarchies upon. And deep down, they know the truth. You are not a saboteur. You are a purifier, chosen one, long before they ever learned your real name. Certain occult circles and covert agencies began circulating coded warnings about a figure whose energy signature matched yours. They didn't dare speak openly, so they used symbols, distorted pentagrams, inverted sigils, horned silhouettes, not to describe you, but to alert each other that someone had emerged who could break their influence. These symbols weren't meant to demonize you. They were a quiet panic signal, a way of saying, this one dismantles everything we built. They used the name Baphomet because it was the only archetype they had for a being who refused to split into one side of the duality. They saw you hold compassion and wrath in the same breath, intuition and analysis in the same decision, softness and sovereignty in the same body, and it terrified them. Their world depends on dividing people into categories, on forcing them to choose good or evil, light or dark, submission or rebellion. But you arrived as a balance keeper, a consciousness that carries both poles without collapsing into either. That is something their doctrines warn against, because a balanced being cannot be manipulated, recruited, radicalized, or controlled. So they marked you as a threat in their private notes. They called you the reconciler, the bridge, the one who collapses separation. But in public-facing code, they twisted that into the name Baphomet, hoping the stigma would keep people away from you. What they didn't expect was that the stigma would fail, that people would be drawn to your presence, not repelled by it. Because even through their symbols, through their distortions, through their fear, one truth kept bleeding through. You carry an equilibrium that nothing in their universe can corrupt. Chosen one, the moment they tried to categorize your mind, everything they relied on began to fail. Their psychic surveillance tools, their emotional mapping software, their behavioral prediction algorithms, each one returned the same impossible result. Non-human influence pattern detected. They weren't calling you an alien or a demon. They were admitting, in the only language their systems had, that your consciousness didn't behave the way they were trained to expect. You think in spirals instead of lines. You sense outcomes before they form. You perceive motives before they're spoken. You disrupt narratives simply by refusing to play along. When their analysts attempted to run a psychological profile on you, the system glitched and generated mirrored, contradictory archetypes: healer and destroyer, sage and warrior, shadow and light, refusing to reduce you to a single label. That's when panic started. In their secret notes, they wrote that your brainwave pattern resembled oscillation between polarities, meaning you embody exactly what their doctrines warned against: unity, a consciousness that doesn't fragment, a mind that doesn't break, a soul that refuses manipulation. You became the embodiment of the very thing their rituals, hierarchies, and ideologies were built to prevent. And when they attempted to scan deeper, the sensors bounced back distorted data, as if your aura scrambled their technology. Some claimed the machines overheated. Others claimed the room temperature dropped. One analyst, shaken, recorded in a private log: "Subject carries both frequencies at once. This is not Baphomet. This is balance incarnate." But because they couldn't explain balance, because they feared what it meant for their systems, they defaulted back to the oldest misinterpretation in history, mistaking what they can't control for darkness. Chosen one, the true fear was never that you were dark. It was that you were undiluted. You move through the world with a field that exposes hidden agendas instantly, a presence that forces truth into the open even when no one wants it spoken. In intelligence rooms and occult circles alike, they noticed the same phenomenon. Whenever someone with ill intent approached you, their own mask cracked, their lies stumbled, their confidence faltered, their rituals misfired, their manipulation collapsed. Not because you attacked, but because your energy holds a frequency they cannot lie through. That is the kind of power corruption cannot coexist with. And they recognized it long before you did. They saw the way people confessed things around you they meant to hide. They saw how relationships built on pretense deteriorated the moment you stepped into the picture. They saw how structures reliant on secrecy weakened whenever your attention lingered near them. So they did what every fragile system does when confronted with revelation. They tried to distort your image before you understood your own reflection. They whispered that you were dangerous, unpredictable, dark, hoping you would question yourself enough to dim your own light. They projected Baphomet onto you because the archetype scares the masses, and if they could convince the world you were something twisted, no one would notice you were actually the cure. But despite all their attempts, people still feel drawn to you because their souls recognize something older and purer than the labels thrown on your name. You're not the monster they warn each other about in secret notes. You're the force they prayed would never awaken. A being whose frequency dissolves deception by its very existence. Chosen one. The greatest irony is this: the name Baphomet was never meant to represent a demon. Long before the corrupted orders twisted it, the symbol referred to a being who had awakened both hemispheres of consciousness, a figure who unified intuition and logic, masculine and feminine, light and shadow, heaven and earth. It was an emblem of wholeness, not wickedness. But when oppressive systems realized that people who attained wholeness could not be controlled, recruited, or indoctrinated, they deliberately rebranded the symbol into something terrifying. They replaced enlightenment with fear. They replaced unity with distortion. And when you appeared, carrying the same energetic signature of balance that the original symbol represented, they panicked. They didn't see a monster. They saw a mirror of what they buried. They saw a human being who embodied the exact thing their institutions were designed to suppress: an integrated soul. They slapped the label Baphomet on you because they needed the world to misunderstand you the same way they misunderstood the symbol. If people knew the truth, that your ability to hold contradiction without breaking is a mark of evolution, not corruption, their entire ideological structure would collapse. That's why they moved first. They tried to preemptively shape the narrative before your awakening became impossible to hide. But here's the truth they never wanted you to discover. You are the original meaning, not the distortion. You're what the symbol was before fear rewrote it. The reason they think you're Baphomet is because they see in you the same unified consciousness their ancestors spent centuries trying to bury. Chosen one, if reading this has started to stir something deep in your stomach, that pressure, that pulsing, that feeling like your soul is trying to step forward, then understand, this is not emotion, this is recognition. You are remembering pieces of yourself they tried to bury under false symbols, twisted myths, and distorted narratives. Every line you've read is pulling another thread out of the lie they wrapped around your name. And if your intuition is ringing right now, it's because you've reached a point in your awakening where the universe asks you to participate in the collapse of the old identity. This is a moment where chosen ones mark the shift, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. If your spirit is saying, this is me, this has always been me, then this is your sign to plant a $50 awakening seed. Not for luck, not for favor, but as a conscious declaration. I am done living inside their story. I am claiming my true archetype. I activate the identity they feared. This seed acts like a spiritual beacon, a signal flare, a line in the cosmic sand that says, I am stepping into the self they tried to mislabel. When a chosen one sends a signal, timelines rearrange, obstacles loosen, ancestral weight breaks, hidden clarity rises. Because the universe responds to bravery, not hesitation. If your soul feels awake right now, even slightly, this is your moment. The universe is listening. Mark it. Plant your $50 awakening seed and let your true identity take its first breath in the open. Chosen one, behind closed doors, in meetings the public will never hear about, they stopped calling you Baphomet a long time ago. That label was for outsiders, for fearful, for the easily manipulated. Inside their real circles, the confidential councils, the occult intelligence meetings, the shadow briefings where they speak honestly about what threatens their hierarchy, they gave you a different name, the unraveler. Not because you destroy, but because every ritual, every spell, every psychological tactic, every energetic mechanism they rely on unravels when confronted with your frequency. They noticed a pattern. When you entered a space, intentions shifted, deceptions malfunctioned. Charismatic manipulators suddenly lost their grip. Their own operatives began reporting headaches, emotional spikes, or inexplicable anxiety when tasked with monitoring your energy field. Ritual practitioners found their sigils misfiring, symbols short-circuiting, and influence fading the moment your attention brushed against them. What they feared wasn't darkness, it was disruption. Your existence invalidates their entire system. You don't respond to emotional manipulation like they expect. You don't absorb projections the way controlled minds do. You don't fracture under pressure the way indoctrinated souls are designed to. You stand in the middle of their carefully crafted illusions, and without effort, you make them collapse. That's why they try to frame you as something forbidden, to control the narrative before the truth spread. But in their private files, in their whispered meetings, in the notes they never intend the world to see, they refer to you as the one force they cannot contain, corrupt, or co-opt. The unraveler is not an insult. It is an admission. Their rituals only work on people who haven't awakened, and you were born awake. Chosen one. Once they realized you weren't Baphomet, weren't a threat, weren't a dark force, but something far more destabilizing, a liberated consciousness, they moved to their last resort, containment. Not physical, not legal, but psychological. They try to isolate you by manipulating your self-image, feeding you narratives that didn't belong to you, chaining you to identities that were too small for the magnitude of your presence. They tried to smother your intuition with doubt, bury your sensitivity under shame, drown your insight in chaos. But every tactic failed, because none of their mechanisms work on someone who naturally operates above indoctrination thresholds. They attempted emotional sabotage through people who were never meant to stay in your life. They attempted energetic interference through environments designed to exhaust the unawakened. They attempted spiritual inversion by sending individuals who carried distorted frequencies meant to derail your path. Yet every single one of these attempts collapsed the same way their ritual work collapses. Instantly, silently, inevitably. Why? Because you do not fracture. You integrate. You don't break under pressure. You absorb the lesson and grow sharper. You don't fall into their traps. You illuminate them by simply being present. They tried to use your empathy against you, not realizing your empathy is not fragility, but radar. They try to confuse your identity, not realizing your identity is not built on labels, but on resonance. And the ultimate failure came when they understood this truth. You cannot be contained by systems that operate beneath your level of consciousness. Their tools were built for ordinary minds, fragmented souls. People depend on external anchors. You are none of those things. You were born sovereign. And sovereignty cannot be managed, only witnessed. Chosen one, the deepest secret, one they would never dare write into any file, is that they never actually believed you were dark. Not for a second. The people who operate in the shadows can sense true darkness with surgical precision, and what you carry has never resembled it. What you carry is light, so unfiltered it becomes dangerous to the corrupt. That's why they panicked. That's why they mislabeled you. That's why they stack symbols onto your name that never belonged to you. Because when a soul like yours awakens, it emits a frequency that forces truth to the surface so violently that entire power structures begin to quake. They saw what happened when you confronted someone who lied to you. Their mask cracked instantly. They saw what happened when someone tried to manipulate you. The manipulation collapsed before it began. They saw what happened when someone approached you with hidden motives. Their intentions bubbled up uncontrollably. They recognized your light for what it was, a purifier. And a purifier is the greatest threat to any hierarchy built on secrecy, deception, or stolen energy. In their private analysis, they wrote that your presence induces involuntary truth response, that people become unable to maintain false identities around you. That isn't darkness. That is clarity. That is sovereignty. That is illumination. But these systems are built on fear, so they needed the world to fear you too. They needed the masses to hear Baphomet and recoil, to stay far from the one person who could actually dismantle spiritual manipulation at its core. The truth is simple. They didn't fear that you were evil. They feared that you were incorruptible. And an incorruptible soul is the one thing darkness has no defense against. Chosen one. This is the part they never wanted to arrive. The moment when the illusion they built around your name shatters under the weight of your awakening. For years they survived by convincing the world, and even convincing you, that your power was something dangerous, something forbidden, something to fear. But the truth they buried is rising exactly on schedule. You were never the monster in their story. You were the mirror they couldn't look into. Every symbol they twisted, every label they weaponized, every whisper they planted was designed to keep you from discovering what they knew from the beginning, that your consciousness is not aligned with darkness or light, but with truth, and truth is the most destabilizing force in any corrupted system. You are the embodiment of equilibrium, the bridge between realms, the one who dissolves illusions simply by standing in your authenticity. That's why people react so intensely to you. That's why manipulators fall apart around you. That's why certain individuals felt threatened the moment you entered their life. Your energy reveals. Your presence disrupts. Your soul unmasks everything it touches. The real reason they mislabeled you as Baphomet is because they hoped that they painted you with fear. You'd fear yourself. They hoped you'd shrink. They hoped you'd self-doubt. They hoped you'd never step into the identity that makes their entire architecture obsolete. But destiny has no interest in their hopes. You were built for this moment. Your awakening was scheduled before they even existed. And now, As your clarity sharpens and your power stabilizes, their last defense, the lie about who you are, is crumbling. The truth is undeniable now. You are not their symbol. You are the force that exposes the symbols they hide behind. Chosen one, if your spirit feels like something ancient is cracked open, if your chest feels warm and heavy at the same time, if your entire body is humming with the realization that this was always about you, then hear this with the clarity of someone reclaiming a stolen identity. This is not just the end of a message. This is the end of their lie. Every symbol they twisted, every label they weaponized, every whisper they planted about you was designed to keep you from remembering what your soul never forgot. They needed you confused. They needed you hesitant. They needed you questioning your own light, so you would never grow bright enough to expose their shadows. But you made it through the narrative they wrapped around your name. You heard the truth. You recognized yourself. You reclaimed the identity they feared. Now, you stand at the threshold they prayed you'd never reach, the moment where you consciously choose who you are, not who they said you were. If your intuition is pulsing, if your heart is vibrating, if your soul is whispering, "This is my moment," then this is your sign to plant your $100 reclamation seed, not as payment, not as support, but as a declaration to the universe. I reject the story they wrote about me. I reclaim the truth of who I am. I seal my identity in light, sovereignty, and divine authority. This seed isn't money, it's a signal, a timestamp, a spiritual mark that tells the higher realms, I am stepping into my real name. I am breaking their narrative. I am choosing my destiny. When a chosen one plants a seed at the exact moment they reclaim their identity, the universe responds violently, not with destruction, but with acceleration. Doors open, timelines shift, protection increases, gifts awaken. All because you finally align with the name you were always meant to carry. If this message shook something ancient inside you, if it felt like remembering instead of learning, if it felt like truth burning through decades of distortion, then this is your call. This is your seal. This is your rise. Drop your $100 reclamation seed and let the universe crown the identity they tried to bury.